Read your cards carefully. He's knocked out. Colorless, 2000 Dragon. The Middle Era is 2002 to 2013. Fighting. Sound it out. Psychic. The Pre-Modern Era is 2013 to 20. You must immediately advance. Alright, let's get started.
Hi, I'm Neil.
I'm Katie.
And we are Higher Education. In this video, we're going to continue our coverage of our house rules and the era divisions. We are going to go more in depth explaining the different divisions that we use to divide our cards into 4 separate eras based on the year that the card was printed.
The first era we have is the Retro Era. This is 1999 to 2002. The next era is called Middle, and that is from 2002 to 2013. The Pre-Modern Era is the third era, and that is from 2013 to 2019. And then the last era that we currently have is Modern, and that is 2020 to now.
Why do we divide our cards into different eras? Well, the main reason is because we want to be able to use every single card that we own. And because rules and cards have shifted over time, some cards just simply can't work well together, and some cards would never be chosen to be in a deck over the more powerful cards that exist presently. For example, consider these two Beedrill. The one on the left is from base set 2. It was printed in the year 2000. The one on the right uses the same art, but it's from XY Evolutions, printed in the year 2016. The XY Evolutions Beedrill has 150% HP, it has 40 more HP. The XY Evolutions Beedrill also performs generally more powerful attacks for much less energy. The only advantage that the old Beedrill, the Retro Beedrill from 2000, has over the Pre-Modern Beedrill from 2016 is that it has resistance to fighting, which the Pre-Modern Beedrill does not. So if you were selecting between these two cards to place into a deck, you would almost always choose the 2016 Beedrill.
Now, let's discuss the Retro Era. This is from 1999 to 2002. We consider the end of the Retro Era to be marked by the introduction of supporter cards and the introduction of rulebox Pokémon cards.
Some distinctive features of the Retro Era are that there are very few limitations on the trainers because there are no supporters. They did introduce later stadium cards and tool cards, but in general, almost all of the trainers in the Retro Era can be played in the same turn. There are no first turn limitations in the Retro Era at all. The very first player on the very first turn in a Retro Era game can attack or use any trainer cards that they choose. We do not allow any card printed in the year 2002 that happens to be a supporter or a rulebox Pokemon to be used in Retro Era decks.
So now let's look at a group of cards that we want to highlight from the Retro Era. These are trainer cards, and as you look at these cards, you can see that they're pretty powerful by themselves. The coolest part is you can use them all together in the same turn at any point during the game, including your first turn of the game. The current version of Professor Oak is a supporter card, so you can only play one supporter card per turn, so that severely limits how much you can do in your turn, whereas in Retro, there are no limitations on that. The other one to look at is Computer Search. They brought this card back in the Middle Era as an Ace-Spec card. As mentioned in another video, Ace-Spec cards are very powerful cards, and you can only have one Ace-Spec card in your deck, and that is an official rule that we do follow.
Now let's look at the Middle Era, which contains cards printed from 2002 to 2013. Again, we allow any cards printed in 2002 to flex between Retro and Middle as long as they are not supporter cards or rulebox Pokemon. The Middle Era is highlighted as ending with the introduction of the dragon and fairy types, which occurred around 2012 and 2013. Some distinctive features of the Middle Era is that there's a wide variety of cards. This was a broad gap of time, but a time when the Pokemon trading card game was generally not as popular, meaning that there are generally fewer copies of these cards, and it's definitely the sections in our collections that are the smallest. Mm-hmm. There are various groups of cards, such as Delta Species and Team Plasma cards, that exist in the Middle Era. Similar to the Retro Era, there are no first turn limitations, so the very first player on the very first turn of the game may attack or play any cards, including supporters, that they would like to. The only restriction we have on the Middle Era is that we do not allow any fairy cards or dragon type cards. All dragon type cards and fairy type cards must be played in pre-modern. Some of the most powerful cards in the Middle Era that we may end up having to shift into pre-modern at some point are the Team Plasma cards. This is a whole set of cards that have great synergy because they're designed to go well together. The cards you see here, Coal Rest Machine, allows you to search your deck for a Plasma Energy card. Deoxys EX, when attached with a Plasma Energy card, has an attack that is much more powerful than when it does not have a Plasma Energy card attached. I have an entire deck that comprised of Team Plasma cards, and they work very well together. Because they're predominantly printed in the years 2012 and 2013, Team Plasma cards tend to be among the most powerful in the Middle Era as we divide the cards. We do not allow any Team Plasma cards that are printed in 2013 to flex forward into the pre-modern era.
Now we're going to talk about the pre-modern era. This is from 2013 to 2019, and the key ending point for this era is the removal of fairy type at the very beginning of 2020.
Some key features of the pre-modern era is that they're probably the most common cards that you can find. During this time, Pokemon Go and other things increased the popularity of the Pokemon trading card game, so many more of these cards were printed and being collected. The fairy type exists only within the pre-modern era, as it was introduced at the beginning of the pre-modern era and removed at the beginning of the modern era. The pre-modern era also features a wide variety of powerful rulebox cards, such as GXs or Tag Team cards. Tag Team GX cards were the first rulebox cards to allow the taking of 3 prize cards upon a knockout. During the very first turn of the game, that player cannot attack. This limitation was introduced in the pre-modern era, so we use it for any game played with cards from the pre-modern era. Our only restriction for pre-modern cards is that there are no Team Plasma cards allowed, even if they were printed in 2013. We also force all Dragon-type cards into the pre-modern era, even if they happen to be printed in 2012.
Some cards that we want to highlight from the pre-modern era are Dragon and Fairy. One thing to highlight about Dragon-type Pokemon is that there is no basic Dragon energy. So you often see Dragon cards that use 2, 3, sometimes even 4 different types of energy. It can make it difficult to play with those cards unless you have special Dragon energies that can count as any type of energy when attached to a Dragon type card. Another thing to note is in the pre-modern era, Dragon cards are typically weak against Fairy. Then when we look at Fairy type Pokemon, we notice a few things. First, they are only found in the pre-modern era, as they were introduced in 2013 and were taken away at the very end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. There are relatively few Fairy Pokemon cards, especially when compared to the other types of Pokemon that there are, and they tend to be slightly less powerful. They tend to have less powerful attacks and slightly less HP than other Pokemon in their cohort. The other thing to know about fairy type Pokemon is that they do have their own basic energy. They tend to use fairy energy exclusively. They also tend to focus on healing and supporting other Pokemon in play rather than doing lots of damage to the opposing active Pokemon. Then the last era that we're going to look at is the modern era, that is 2020 to present day. We don't have an ending point for this era yet. I'm sure eventually we will, and we'll update you as necessary on that.
The modern era has a few unique features to it. We don't have any overlap here with pre-modern, so we don't allow any cards to flex between pre-modern and modern. That's partly because we have more than enough pre-modern cards, and we're starting to acquire more modern cards as the sets come out. Some distinctive features of the modern era is kind of the return of groups, with the Rapid Strike and Single Strike Pokemon being introduced in the Battle Styles set and continuing so far. The pre-modern era didn't really see many groups outside of the Ultra Beasts. This set is the newest, tends to be the most powerful. And with the modern era, we saw the introduction of a new powerful form of Rulebox card that also appears in evolutionary families, the V cards and the V Max cards that evolve from them. During the modern era, some type alignments occurred. Fairy types were removed, cards that were previously fairy have been reclassified as psychic, and cards that were previously classified as psychic because they were poison type have been reclassified as darkness. Along with this, some of the weaknesses and resistances that typically occurred with those types in previous eras have been shifted. For example, darkness types now appear as primarily weak against grass, whereas they used to be primarily weak against fighting. The only restriction we have on cards when building decks for the modern era is that we do not use any cards from previous eras. We're excited to see what else the modern era brings, and especially the return of dragon types with the Evolving Skies set. In general, we use eras in order to unlock our collections and be able to play with any card that we own. We only build decks within eras, and we use slightly different rules depending on which era we're playing in. Otherwise, we use the most current set of rules for any situation that occurs.
Hi, and thank you for watching our video. We are Higher Education.
Play, learn.
Read your cards carefully. He's knocked out. Colorless to 2000 Dragon. The middle era is 2002 to 2013. Good game.